Why don't we jump into things at this stage? Do you guys feel ready, Brian, Brad? Good to go? Okay.
Good
Good
to
to
go.
go.
Let's go.
Well, let's start off with just some introductions here. The topic obviously is scaling high touch philanthropy, reaching more donors without losing what matters. And ultimately, what that's really about is how to engage folks who are really unassigned but have potential and figuring out, how to really continue to do what really is most effective, one-to-one building of relationships, but scale that, without necessarily just hiring a million more frontline fundraisers to do it. I work for MarketSmart. Brian Powell at Grove City College is a client of MarketSmart, so we'll be using examples from the field. But today is not just a big MarketSmart sales pitch. It will really cover how you could do this in-house, whether you take all of what we have to say or some of it. I've been with the company for about 12 years, so I've got a lot of knowledge of kind of how this is operated with many different clients. But I'll pass it over to Brad to introduce himself as well.
Sure. Uh, Thanks, Jeff. And thanks, Brian, for joining me, joining this conversation. I'm Brad Smith. I run a philanthropic consultancy called Rootstock Philanthropy. I also run a LinkedIn group called the Philanthropy Network. We have about 130,000 members of our group. If you're on LinkedIn, join us. Sort of a catch-all for everything in fundraising, philanthropy, social impact work, USAID, global do-gooding work. But I spent the last almost my entire career in major gift fundraising. This idea of scaling high touch philanthropy is something I've been puzzling on my entire career, and happy to be able to talk about it here. I'll turn it over to you, Brian.
Yeah, Brian Powell. I'm here at Grove City College. I've been here for around 2 decades. How is that even possible? A grad from Grove City. We're about an hour north of Pittsburgh. We are the largest school in the country that does not accept any federal funds. And we're a Christian liberal arts college. And it's been a joy to work with MarketSmart for really going back to 2014. So we're going to share some stories, share some data, and hopefully some of what I can share will be helpful to you. But most of my career has been spent in the major gift space, and absolutely love working for this mission for higher ed and serving our donors. So looking forward to sharing what we prepared for you today.
Well, let's jump into it, and we'll try not to do too much of sort of setting the stage or sort of the why, but there's always a little need for that in these situations. But really try to get into the meat and potatoes as quick as possible. But we really have a simple four-part agenda here. Very quick and short. We're going to talk a little bit about what is sort of missing from the process right now that's sort of leaving money on the table, a scalable solution, and then we'll, like Brian was saying, really dive into his experience implementing that scalable solution, as well as with kind of Brad's insights from the field in terms of how the same problems and solutions have kind of revealed themselves within other organizations. And then we'll save some time at the end to talk a bit about how you could do this in-house. So some of the tips we're sharing, and plenty of time for Q&A from the group. So if you do ask a question in the chat tool today, and perhaps we miss it, we'll try to get back to it at the end of the presentation. And in case you're wondering, sometimes I know the question comes in, we are recording this. We will send you the slides and the recording afterwards. Now, having said that, jumping into kind of that first and second really agenda topic, ultimately something that we talk a lot about in our blogs, our webinars, et cetera. So this might be a little bit of a topic you're familiar with, but I want to start off kind of saying that the point of today's presentation is not to say stop everything you're doing and do something completely different. It's actually how do we do more of what works? And what does really work is one-to-one relationship building for major gifts. But the challenge really isn't so much that that doesn't work with people you're engaging personally. It's that so many people are left out of that process because kind of the formula is really dependent on bandwidth, either bandwidth of the frontline fundraiser or frontline fundraising team to actually have time to do that personal interaction, but also, not so much bandwidth, but willingness from the supporter to actually interact on that level. So often what we're seeing, although you might have something a little different than this, is that organizations have a lot of focus on identification, whether that's wealth screening or different modeling sources, and then they go right into caseload population in terms of allocating the top scoring prospects. and everything else here, qualification, cultivation, solicitation, it's all done one to one. The challenge that you run into, one is again that many people just don't even make it into that process, but a lot of the folks who do make it in have some of the right, sort of readings. Maybe they have wealth or even affinity, but at the end of the day, when you finally get a chance to interact with them one to one, they say, "Yeah, I'm just not ready yet," in a sense. So some studies say, only one third of the prospects assigned to portfolios are truly ready, for outreach. So I want to pause here and just give Brian and Brad, yeah, a chance to jump in terms of just, yeah, any thoughts or you have or what you've been seeing in the field that, aligns with that.
Yeah, sure. Brian, I'll jump in here. So if we have a lot of major gift officers on the call, and we've probably seen um, this ratio of calls to meetings expand over our careers. When I started as a major gift officer, mind you, this is a long time ago, in 2000, um, I think it took about 3 to 4 emails and phone calls to get a single meeting. And that paradigm has shifted considerably. And even with more and better prospect research, the more we knew about prospects, the better, the more likely they were to be added to our portfolios. But even that didn't guarantee successful outreach. But that number has expanded. I love Brian's thoughts on this too. But when I talk to our clients at Rootstock, in sometimes it's 10 calls, 10 emails, 15 emails, 20 emails per individual major donor meeting. And if you're doing that against what you're showing me here, Jeff, with one third of those people that actually meet with you who are ready for a conversation, that's really, really challenging math for major gift fundraising. Not only is it a lot of cold calling, but it's talking to people who really aren't ready for or prepared for the kind of conversations, the meaningful conversations that matter, about their values, about the mission of the organization, about things that you're working on. It becomes much more transactional, and the financial transaction becomes part of that qualification, which I don't know, that has never been a satisfying start to a philanthropic or a major donor journey to me. But Brian, how's this manifest at Grove City?
Yeah, I mean I'm just totally totally in line with that as far as what we've seen. I mean, getting started into development work. Yeah, I mean it was certainly so much easier. I mean, these were certainly the norm of phone-a-thon days in our development shops and those kinds of things. So I mean the reachability of folks was so much easier at that time. So we've certainly seen that creeping north of 10, to 15, outreaches per one response. So some of it's just actually just connecting and reaching person on the right, on the right number, the right way, the right day. And so, yeah, I've certainly seen that at Grove City over the years, certainly seen that at Carnegie Mellon where I served as well. And that leads to a lot of burnout, not only for the fundraisers, but for the donors. And then, pursuing what I would say the wrong opportunities, people that aren't ready, that we're just sort of tone deaf. And then the other alternative is the usual suspects, and that might feel really productive, but it may actually, if we're being honest with ourselves, may do very little to really advance our institutions. And so I think we've all, if we're being honest with ourselves, we've seen that as well. So yeah, where we've seen the scalability and I know Jeff, you'll take us there, but is using technology to help free us up so that we can do more of those that make establish those human connections, those personal notes, linking donors to the impact that they're having, all of those meaningful things that donors are really looking for and expecting.
Well said.
Now, there's a lot on this slide, so let me break it down for you, although I'm sure you'll understand it. But this, especially the yellow kind of encircled area, we're going to be talking really primarily about that area. So what we're doing with Brian, with other organizations, and what you could also do, with Market Smart on your own as well, is put more process between identification and caseload population, especially for the folks outside the tried and true and outside the people you're already talking to. So thinking about, those that are unassigned, but they have, affinity or they have a high capacity score. For the most part, a lot of the organizations I talk to, if you ask, well, what are you doing with that unassigned pool? They'll be doing things, but it's mainly transactional annual fund related marketing, whether it's solicitations or events or, et cetera. And that's fine, but it's just not actually giving you a temperature check on the individual in terms of their readiness for this type of conversation. Now, because you can't just go and hire a bunch more people to make calls to those individuals, really what we recommend, and not every supporter is going to engage with it, but those that do, as we'll show you, there's huge wins to be had in actually inviting those unassigned folks to lean in and in their own words and their own actions tell you if they have readiness for a conversation. So it's in a way, this webinar is a really long-winded way of just saying, rather than, manipulating more data, what if you just asked them if they wanted to have a conversation with you, which really isn't so mind-blowing, but I think as you go through this, you'll see there's a really specific methodology to do this. But it's all about getting those folks to tell you where they are in the consideration process so that you can focus your limited time for outreach on people who've already raised their hand and said, I'm ready for that type of outreach. Now, another piece of the puzzle in terms of using technology is using automation to multiply the nurture strategy for those that come out of this saying, maybe, possibly, I'm not sure, but I would be willing to engage more. So not, encumbering the frontline team with making outreach to people who've already told you it's a maybe, but rather keeping that iron hot by multiplying that frontline fundraiser. So I'll show you what I mean by that. It's not to say like an avatar or some sort of, non-human being that's soliciting your supporters. This is more about helping the frontline fundraiser multiply themselves and getting more touches out to folks. So again, I'll give you a tangible understanding of that. But before anything, I just wanted to give everyone an understanding of like, where do these tactics that we're going to describe fit? They fit between that identification and caseload population stage. I don't know if Brian or Brad, you have thoughts you want to add to that. If you do, or sorry, if you don't, I'm happy to jump right into the kind of the tactics, but feel free to jump in if you'd like.
Well, what I wanted to point out, and I think it's important, is that prospect research is essential to any modern major gift shop, whether you're entering a campaign, in a campaign, and we would talk about, and I'll just use the terminology that we would use called right sizing asks. Typically in our business, you go from 100,000, 250, 500, a million in terms of rating bands, right? As we're thinking about a major gifts pool. There's a 2x difference between a 250K rated prospect and a 500K rated prospect. And our research teams, our prospect research teams, can get very good at identifying assets for that specific major gift ask, right? So you're not leaving that 250K on the table. Even in that scenario, the research team is bandwidth limited. So the number of really deep, in-depth prospect evaluations that they can perform. What's really interesting about this is that take a typical, again, Brian, I don't know how many records you have in your college total, but take a mid-sized liberal arts college with maybe 50,000 alumni records. Being able to talk to any individual in the distribution phase of their lives, 55 or older, let's say, for example, and invite them into a discussion. And let's face it, successful graduates don't always rate at 4.0 or 100K. They may have inherited funds that we have no idea that they've inherited. They may have grandparents that left them low basis General Electric stock. We don't know, but we're still, if they haven't made it into the portfolio, right, they are not being engaged at a level that is commensurate with the wealth that they might have in their family. What this, I think, does is help to identify those who are ready for a conversation without ever having to do any of the identification process, without having to ever going through the prospect research process, so that when you have a conversation with them, they know what it's about. They've had a chance to give you feedback on the things that you're already doing. And what a great privilege, right, as a major gift officer, to show up at somebody's door and have a conversation about how much your institution means to them, rather than convincing them to make their first annual fund gift, which again, I always found very unsatisfying.
Now, well put.
Yeah, Brad. I mean, we have, certainly in terms of scale, I mean, 30,000, over 30,000 alumni, additional records to push it close to about 50,000. So if you think about that, and I would describe our kind of reinvestment and advancement as kind of as we can, as a small institution, as tuition dependent. So if there's others, out there today, I hear you. I mean, we're in it with you in that regard. And so this has just been unbelievable for us, because the traditional metrics that we would previously had available to us that we're going to look to are all the same that we look to in the business historically, right? You talked about well screening, Brad, and some of the other prospect screening tools. Obviously, the data of giving to your institution, to your organization, consecutive years. Even some other consultant generated models and algorithms. Some of you may have in institutions that can do that in house. We've leveraged all of that over the years, and we've had the blessing of being a part of a couple of capital campaigns. But a lot of that's been limited, static kind of database information. And I would just say, well, it's simple, Jeff. It is bold once you ask someone's opinion, because guess what? They may not be fully in alignment. They may have had an experience back in their undergraduate days that they've been gnawing at. And I always joke, and so many of you here today, I'm sure we've joked that we could kind of add counselor, on the back of our card. But they want to be heard. They want to be seen. They want to be listened to. And so I think in the early days, and we'll see as we transition here into kind of Grove City's story, but if you're posturing, if you're considering, maybe you're already doing it, I think I would applaud you in that kind of a more regular rhythm of asking for feedback, inviting feedback from your donors, from your alumni, from your the folks that you serve. I would say for us, that was scary at first. It took a bold step, but it's been proven time and time again to be a worthwhile endeavor. And it's obviously, we believe, I think you're on this call today, it's the right way. It's the right thing to do to really, and Market Smart does is a donor-driven fundraising process to put the donors back where they have always belonged. And that's in the driver's seat. And yeah, so I'll pause there. That's a little bit of my soapbox, but certainly that's been what we've seen as well.
Yeah, so I don't even come from fundraising originally. I've just been at Market Smart for over a decade, and it reminds me how throughout my tenure I've always heard the adage, ask for money, you'll get advice. Ask for advice, you'll get money. But it seems for the most part that is an adage that really applies to one-to-one engagement. When I sort of ask a charity, well, so what do you do within your marketing to ask for someone's opinion and story? It's not quite that it spills over that way, and so ultimately, whether Market Smart did it, whether you just went to your marketing director after it and said, hey, I want to do one or all these things, the secret to the sauce, essentially, that we've uncovered over many years, oops, I went forward too quick, 1 second, is really, you could put it into kind of 4 bullets, and we'll talk about each of them. One is using surveys as a means to broaden the discovery process and invite more people to share their opinion and story. A second component, as I've already kind of alluded to, is first off, assigning the people who are ready to your frontline fundraisers to build relationships. But the reality is most people are going to self-identify as being at kind of like a maybe stage. It's no different than why you assign, everyone to your portfolio and 2/3 aren't ready. So there needs to be, though, a methodology for that bucket of people, that bigger bucket of people who are in a more of an awareness building stage. And that second tactic is using automation to multiply frontline fundraisers, non-solicitous nurturing messages to those folks, such as donor stories, impact stories. So not about multiplying solicitations, but really multiplying non-solicitation. And finally, a component that many of you probably already have, but you may not be quite either getting the traffic to it and or actually using the data effectively. But when we say VIP microsite, it's really to say tracking how people engage with content on your website related to major and legacy gifts. So a storyline could be this: you do a survey, and let's just imagine one question in it is, would you talk to a frontline fundraiser or a gift officer about how to make a bigger impact at X organization? The people who say, I'm ready, you're going to want to, of course, talk to personally. But the people who say maybe, imagine if you were to drip stories of other folks who've made those types of gifts and the impact. And 6 or 12 months later, you're looking at the tracking and you see, Joe Smith, who said maybe at first, 6 or 12 months later, he's been clicking through on these automated touches. He's just actually spent time on our website yesterday looking at sample bequest language. These are all signs through their words, through their actions, that they're ready for outreach, but you're not going to see them solely through their giving and their event participation and their wealth score. You have to provide them these opportunities to lean in. And then the fourth kind of component, if it's survey automation, tracking, online engagement, is having a way to actually score all of that. If you don't have a way to score it, it's going to just be a lot of data, a lot of matrix of survey data, automation, et cetera. And so ultimately, those four things combined, though, can unlock incredible results. And Grove City is an amazing case study of this. I'll kind of set the stage, but Brian, feel free to jump in at here. And then, yeah, Brad, I'd love to just kind of hear how this story, you've seen it play out in other ways in other organizations, but we're already kind of dressing it up. Just to state though clearly, Brian there had a successful operation before he started utilizing this type of strategy, but there's that bottleneck of, too few qualified conversations. And just like we're saying, he leveraged really like donor-driven engagement signals to prioritize outreach. He's already kind of speaking a bit to it, but we'll go into some real numbers. But the impact of this type of strategy for Grove City has been millions of dollars in legacy gift commitments, huge growth in 5- and 6-figure gifts, and really impressive increase in their revenue over the past decade, really, without actually expanding in any significant way their head count. And to show kind of one example of this, and then Brian, I'll pass the mic to you. What we're looking at here for Grove City is a chart that shows their annual giving really from 22 to 25. As you can see, the left kind of square here is highlighting results from 22. The right square is highlighting results from 25. So you can see over that span, they went from a $15 million operation to a $28 million operation. And the bigger number up here, the 12 million to 26 million, what you're really seeing there are donations of that 28 million, for instance, that came from gifts of $5,000 and above. So back in 2022, they had 84% of that 15 million coming from gifts of $5,000 plus, about 270 individuals. Fast forward to 2025, it's a higher percentage, but it's also a much greater, group of individuals, 340 who are contributing this. So we'll get into some individual results of kind of each brick that, played a part in building this house. But pausing here, I'm curious to maybe to pose a question. I mean, feel free to add any context you'd like, Brian, but I'm curious if you could just speak to kind of going back to these tactics we were describing, how these tactics have really changed, the trajectory in the way we're seeing of your revenue and your operation. Yeah, what would you say?
Yeah, I mean, it's been a game changer because for us, and I think Brad, you'd kind of alluded to this earlier. I mean, where we kind of started in our careers in major gifts, it was largely, I mean, it was visit-based metrics. It was wealth capacity primarily, guiding, prioritization and identification of prospects. There were a lot of cold calls, far more than I hope many of you are making today. And you'll do far less of those if you adopt some of these, take away, even just one thing from today's presentation, in my opinion. But I saw a lot of people, and you have too on your teams. Maybe you're one of them who's been burned out on kind of those wild goose chases, spending so much of your time in ways that aren't really fulfilling. And quite frankly, I think that's done some harm. I think that's pretty a strong word, but for many of our donors, as we've kind of churned and burned. But for us, yeah, I mean, we're still a work in progress very much. But I think in 2014, I didn't want that to happen when I had the opportunity to become senior director of development. I didn't want that to happen to my team, and so we latched on and just really had found what MarketSmart, with Greg's story, quite frankly, the founder of MarketSmart, as a donor who creates a company serving, because he saw the problem as a donor himself in the way that he was treated. And read the book, find out. I'll let you find out his story on your own. But that really resonated with me, and so we started purely with the survey work. There's some other layers of work that we do today in what we call valuable offerings. But that was a big game changer for us, because no longer were we and so some of these trends you would expect to see from 2014, from 2020, 2022 on, this kind of growth. But we've certainly this is how we identify and prioritize prospects. This is the sole way that we do it. And it continues to be reaffirmed every year as we go through the process, in terms of just the quality of folks who are ready and the amount of time that that's saving us, and the amount of, quite frankly, friction that we're sparing our donors of and fundraisers. So it's, yeah, hopefully that brings a
Well, I
little.
think, Brian, I love the way you laid that out. And I also think, for those of you who are paying attention to the recent press from our industry, the major gift officer role is evolving, right? It's evolving away from, an 80-20, 150 prospect portfolio into distilled, high touch, concierge level, master integrator work, right? It's less qualify, engage, solicit, close. It's much more engage, work with advisors, tax advisors, faculty, administrative leadership, academic leadership. If you're at a university, organizational leadership. It's a real master integrated work. So small distilled portfolios is the game. You're at a 95% of your, I mean, I looked at 92% of your overall total comes from donors of $5,000 or more. That's the story in our industry, right? But how do you scale that, right? How do you engage everybody else in a way that is both responsible and also doesn't create a level of cynicism in your donor pool by, either through your own turnover or through constant solicitation for, X, Y, or Z specific initiative. This is what I love about it. It sort of disaggregates the work of a typical major gift officer, allows that individual to work on concierge level relationship deepening work while this automation happens in the background. And so I love the fact that, you've been committed to this for as long as you have. I feel like you had a crystal ball for 2026 that, I wish more people had a chance to look into. But to me, without a process to talk to your donors, you're leaving so many people. Actually, it's a risk management issue now for major gift programs not to have some level of conversation taking place with the sort of great unwashed, unassigned donor pool.
Yeah, and what I'll add, just one other thing is kind of, because in case you're wondering, of course we understand that trend. We're living it right now. You see our numbers there. 92%. Coming from 340. The reality though is that what I love about this is that we've now had over 7,000 engage and continue to engage daily through various market smart offerings, not just the primary survey. But what I love about it is it's easy. It becomes very easy for me to call, for example, someone in those thousands that's not in those 300 yet, that indicates something meaningful to them, that really stands out. And I'll let you imagine what that might be. But in an open text comments in a survey, there's quite a bit that folks want to share from their hearts, and even folks that are maybe disaligned with where we are today as an organization or something like that. It becomes so personal, so easy for me to then pick up the phone and call those folks, and that fits in my workday. I mean, the amount of work that we're able to accomplish, because this is, I think, calculated something in the nature of since 2014, an average of 80 hours a week of savings in terms of email writing and some of those things that I've pre-written ahead of time and lined up. Again, some of you have pretty sophisticated shops, so maybe you have the ability in your CRM and so forth to do that. We don't. And so this has really been, a significant value add for us. Without hiring more and more and more staff, we've been able to create more, effectiveness for our donors and deliver for our institution, while, really at a modest kind of reinvestment from an institution perspective. So it's been a beautiful thing. But even outside of those 340, they're quite warmed and getting what they need when they need it. And then we've seen over time, and we'll show here in a second, like when they're ready, they're raising their hand, and it's just been marvelous how that's worked.
So I see there's some operational, we'll call them, questions coming in. We'll make sure to address them as well. But I do want to get deeper into the case study. There are some questions out there just asking, what part of this is market smart, without having put it on the page. Essentially, the yellow square is market smart. The surveying, every tactic with Brian, he's deploying through market smart. The automation, the survey, the website, the tracking and scoring, and a dashboard. And someone else was also asking, how do you deliver the survey? It's done through a number of channels. The highest volume of response comes from just sending it out direct via email to folks. But over time, I mean, Brian's been doing this for almost a decade with MarketSmart. So over time, we spread out wide, print surveys, social media, put a, link in the newsletter, put a button on your main website, take our survey, put in a link, after someone makes an annual fund donation. So it's spread out wide and far. But I'll go deeper into this case study, but feel free. I'm not trying to tell you guys not to ask those operational questions, but we'll make sure to kind of bring them all together at the end and answer questions. Ultimately, everything we're describing is, like I just said, it's coming through Brian engaging MarketSmart, but the methodology is true regardless of whether you hire MarketSmart, of using surveys, automation, website tracking to identify people who are ready for outreach. And what Brian was just speaking to, of kind of even more just kind of information here. We will give you guys some real examples of the survey and the automation in such a moment. But sometimes you can look at a chart like the one we just saw and say, oh, well, maybe it was just, one or two people who contributed all of that and it's all, bloated or something like that. Truly. And I think there's also sometimes a myth of sorts that you must follow a donor pyramid of some sort, and sequentially increase in giving. This was just a sample of 8 donors, and Brian had actually pulled this. And what we were showing was their giving before and after they engaged with this process, whether that was having just answered a survey or engaged with automation, et cetera. And you can see, things like folks going from 17,000 to 425,000, or 13,000 to 120,000, or 1450 to 91. So truly, what we're seeing the most, and maybe Brian, you can speak to, in these surveys, there are questions that we ask about, capital initiatives or readiness for, sort of a major gift project. But there's also questions about gifts of assets as a huge lever to pull in terms of asking these supporters who are already giving cash if they have interest in giving through a DAF or a foundation or an IRA or stock, et cetera, things beyond cash. And often things that will not show up in prospect research. They're just not publicly accessible data points other than the value of the person's home, essentially. So the only way you're going to really know is by asking them, whether that's, in person or over some sort of feedback loop. And that's not to say soliciting them, it's just to say having a conversation about, their assets and such, and readiness to actually give in that way. But yeah, Brian, I don't know if there's anything you want to just add in
Yeah,
terms of.
I mean, on these, yeah, because I understand what many of you are maybe thinking, and you hit on a couple of those possible questions, Jeff. But for us, these are folks we just would not have found. Okay, we don't have the staff, by any traditional measure, whether that be lifetime giving measures, engagement with the institution, their wealth screening. They would not have been identified, even had we had a significant or robust prospect research or screening team, which we don't. But even if we did, and I can say that because I've been in R1 large shop, these would be folks that would not have been found there either. And so what it provided was the identification and the opportunity. I mean, then it's the human element. Then it's the relationship. You have to have, and we have a great team. We have a great mission, a great team. Hopefully you do too. And our gift officers do a phenomenal job working, with a more donor centric kind of philosophy, that high touch concierge, like Brad said. That's what we aim for, and I think we do really well. But this delivers those folks who are hungry for that. They're looking for that. So just a couple examples, like we'll call one donor Pam. In 2014, early on in that first survey, Jeff, as you know, it was same survey, same product. It's evolved and expanded and improved as you continue to learn and from other clients and so forth. But same core kind of direction, and it was predominantly legacy focused. So we had in 2014, Pam indicated she was considering a legacy gift. her lifetime giving at that point was just $100. So she's actually not. I was saying at the beginning before the call, I'm like, was she one of these 8? We've done this a few times where we've just kind of grabbed another. This is not our only 8. These aren't even our 8 best. These are just a kind of a random sampling in the case study info that's up on MarketSmart's website. But Pam had given $100. She then, about 18 months later, requested some info on insurance and appreciated assets, gifting through those measures. And then about 2 years, 18 months to 2 years later, became even more engaged in around 2019. And then in 2022, she was ready. Like she was raising her hand. I met with her. We had our first visit that year, and then within 18 months, she gave 150,000. And then we've been on this journey of working with her advisor, crafting a really robust plan to accomplish her objectives for having a professorship through her estate and outright using QCD giving, more complicated asset gifting, and that's valued in the millions. So again, started with $100 lifetime giving in 2014. She wasn't, back to Brad's point earlier, she wasn't ready yet. So my pursuit of time didn't really come in from 2014 until 2022. But every kind of year along the way, she's getting valuable, inspiring information about our organization and valuable information that are coming through these personalized follow-up emails, right? So, and a lot happened, as I found out in 2022, a lot happened in her life that it wouldn't have been the right time. Now I understood why it wasn't the right time, because you could jump the gun and just see, even based on 2014, and just kind of go after Pam real hard, and I love to really lean in that way. I love to relationship build. I love to sell a mission for sure, but this kind of put her in the driver's seat. And I think she's told me, because she compares us to other charities, maybe some that you work for, that don't have that kind of posture. And so yeah, that's just one. Pam's just one example. And there's others that aren't necessarily always super amounts of zeros, and sometimes they're even what we've seen as we've gone along. It's not as long of a time period from 2014 to 2022. More recently, we've done some survey work this year where we had some parents who had never made a gift, who within 2 months, they've gone from zero giving to it looks like they'll be doing an endowment gift of $25,000 or $30,000. So 2 months. So it doesn't always take so many years. I think the difference there for us has been patience, again, trusting the process, but also adding in valuable offerings. I keep using that phrase, but that can be anything as simple as like, watch this video, like you see there, or it could be, have you considered using your retirement, plan, your IRA for gifting, and and lots of other ways in between. So it could be more instructional or inspirational, but all the while it's asking for permission when the donor wants it. So I'll pause there. But that's the case. I'm happy to go in deeper. We have lots of fun examples, but basically that's some of the most rewarding and closest relationships that I have. There's one that actually would have been in any of our shops, even a small shop like ours, would have been identified just based on prospect screening alone, and his giving was under 5,000, so it wasn't significant lifetime, but we couldn't get a response. Gift officers, myself included, we could not find a way, with all the best practices of ways to reach this person. The survey response was the only thing that did it. That invitation for feedback, and from that point, which again, that one actually goes back to 2014 as well. So I'm giving a few of those ones that took a little longer, but we've been able to help. I've been able to help unlock him. We've been, over $500,000 in outright support, and really get serious about crafting with his attorney an estate gift, which is in the millions, and easily one of the closest relationships that I have today. And it was kind of ironically, it was technology that introduced us, but it's been a beautiful thing for even those that are easily identifiable to, again, keep, allow them to just remain in the driver's seat and really invite that feedback, which has just been a great posture for us.
Brian, what you're saying, I think, is, potentially the best part of our work, right? It's getting to know individuals over a long period of time, spending understanding the milestones in their lives, whether it's selling a business, whether it's fully retiring, whether it's making that gift to honor a professor or complete some unfinished business. But I think it allows the fundraiser to use his, her, or their intuition, right, in developing that relationship. And I think when, but intuition has its limits, right? We can't intuit thousands of records. We can't apply our intuition against thousands of records. So, what I appreciate in what you're saying is that there's an opportunity to save our intuition for the conversations that really matter. I hadn't really thought about it in that way, but to me, bringing your best version of yourself, your best intuition, your sense of the prospect relationship into a one-on-one conversation, there's a finite amount of that energy in the world, or for each individual fundraiser. It's why burnout is so high in our profession. So limiting the amount of that intuition you have to burn and using tools that help, again, bubble up people who are ready for conversations, to me, is part of the magic of this sort of approach. This, how do we scale the work that really matters at an organization? And again, I think, Jeff, you've laid it out brilliantly. The market smart's a solution, but it's not the only one. It's just being willing to have a conversation with your donors that invites them to share their journey, not just telling them more about why they should give to your organization. I think that, to me, is that's where we're trying to drive all of this to. It's like, let's scale those conversations in a way that really matters.
Yeah, I mean it's something that you hear from every successful frontline fundraiser, that's how, at the core, how they do it. It's just not often translated to how the charity goes about relational marketing with their highest end prospects. Often it's a lot more about how than why to give in terms of the messaging that those folks are receiving. Here's how you give through DAF. Here's how you give stock. Here's how you put us in your will. And that's all good. It's not that that's bad. It's just it's only relevant if I'm actually ready to make a gift. And most people aren't. We find on average that when folks answer this survey, if we get 100 responses to it, at best, it's going to be kind of like an 80-20 effect. And usually it's more like a 90-10 effect. So of those 100 responses, 10 or 20 are saying, I'm ready for outreach. And even 10 of those 10 or 20, they could be like Brian's Pam, situation where she's saying, I am ready, but I still need more time at the same time, right? We run into that. So, maybe they need to sell a business, or there could be all kinds of life events that need to occur before they're really, really going to do it, even though they're ready today. And so, ultimately, we need to invite those supporters to tell you where they are in the consideration process. But there's, I think, a few, important things that you covered there, Brian, that I just wanted to highlight at a high level. You were just kind of going through these. One is that I often run into folks who will say, well, we have a survey for plan giving, so we're covered on that survey thing, and it's sort of really hard on our end, in the sense that I would say that it's almost like the single worst thing you could do with your survey is just focus on plan giving and just only have, maybe your plan giving person do all the follow-up. There's so much information you could get from that supporter that would reveal mid-level or major gift intent. So that's just something that stuck out to me, Brian. Even though it was a plan giving, inquiry, you don't approach it as just a plan giving prospect. It's a opportunity to do discovery with someone who's leaning in. Furthermore, you just highlighting kind of that it's a long-term game. There are short-term wins too, but you've got to be sort of invested in, not just say, again, not just if you buy a survey from MarketSmart. If you do it on your own, you need to really encourage your leadership to say the value, the wins aren't just in what happens immediately. There's long-term gain if we can stay connected with these folks. And that's what really leads to the automation. So there's, automation that goes on in a lot of shops, but very infrequently do we see, that there's this true multiplying of someone in Brian's role. The idea here, and Brian, you can speak to it further too, is that while Brian is, or his team are talking to someone who answered like this on the survey, I'm likely to give assets, I'm likely to give through DAF, I have no kids, I'm 70 plus, I have advanced career. So let's send that to the frontline team. While they're talking to that type of prospect, meanwhile, the full person who said maybe or possibly to all those same giving questions, but they want more attention still, we can automate that by just having a stream of non-solicitous touches that are ready to go. So with Brian and the team at Grove City, we have at any given time a whole year-long automated stream of notes like this that are all non-solicitous, all focused on storytelling. And really inviting supporters more than kind of thinking, how do I make a gift? More so, why? Why would I step up and do more? And that, of course, is ingrained in your stories. But I just wanted to kind of highlight that as we're going through all this and story and Brian's kind of vantage point on it. Before I go any further, I know I'm jumping around a little bit.
Yeah, no,
Yeah.
I was going to just comment on that too, because I mean, you of course the dashboard, like you can evaluate all these things in clicks and you should open rates and all those things when it comes to the tech that like emails like that that are maybe the personalized follow. But like I evaluate them a little differently, right? So I mean, I do look at that. We do look at that as part of just kind of some benchmarking, but I look at it like you maybe you wouldn't be surprised on this call. Maybe there's many who are like, yeah, you're already probably far ahead of us. But I think it's amazing to see hey, I love that video. What an incredible video. And I'll get replies back on that. Now we've got the start of a relationship, right? And I didn't have to pause in my day from the core strategies that I have for my week to do that. So yeah, again, there are, I would say, the lion's share of folks assume that I did write it, but I didn't really type it up at that moment and send it, right? So, and you guys, again, many of you understand that better than I, but that took a little bit of an adjustment for us. It felt, maybe disingenuous at the start. We're writing it all, we're approving it all, we're just kind of lining that up at the start of the year. That's where the scalability comes in. But I would say the other part, Jeff, is that I think the big key takeaway for me and that I would want you to take away today is don't skip the why. Do not skip the why. What do I mean by that? Like we talk so much about the what and how. We're really good at fundraisers about talking about that. But yet, why do you work for the organization that you work for right now? You have a story, and so do our donors. So don't skip that why. And in fact, every one of our calls, we should be reminding the donors about their why, even those that we've known for 20 years, since 2014, Pam and Bill and Bob and the donors that are in our portfolios that we're kind of showcasing a few in the case study today. Don't skip the why. And I think however you do that, again, Market Smart's just like Brad said, it's just one tool. There's lots of ways that you can do that. But to me, I think, and that the other comment about just don't skip the why is that it's really easy in disrupted times like this, right? Demographic cliffs for higher ed, increasing inflation rapidly. It seems like it's out of control, and yet we have generous people, and we have obviously incredible needs. And so, our other administrators, our other colleagues outside of advancement board members, et cetera, other leadership, they may not always understand. So that's part of the journey of for us is inviting them, trying to invite them into that, because the reality is there's no shortcuts in relationship building. I don't know, Brad. Have you found any?
Look, hey, I have not. In fact, if you try to cut the corner, and most likely you will not get a return phone call. But I've talked about this in most of my career. Being a major gift officer is a great job. It's also becoming more and more important to organizations across the board. It is the entry point for high net worth individuals. It's a place where values-based philanthropic conversations are taking place. It is ultimate concierge level work, and that time in front of donors, especially with seasoned, experienced major gift officers, is how institutions get built. Increasingly, it's how they get built, and of course, some of that gets passed off to presidents and other members of the senior leadership. But it starts with the major gift officer. So much of it, and at the institutions I've had the pleasure of working for and with. Major gift officer meetings lead to creations of infrastructure, faculty positions, new programs. And without those major gift officers, would those even happen? Who knows? But I think our industry decided to staff that concierge function with the major gift officer. And the portfolio-based, metro-sized major gift officer is not going away. But the position has changed. The role and the skill sets have changed. And so instead of spending a month or two of your year cold calling or trying to convince reluctant donors to meet with you or to spend some time with you, why not spend time with people who are ready for that discussion? Because that's how institutions get built. not in the cold calling cubicle land that some of us have spent our time in.
Yeah, yeah. And this last slide, and I promise for everybody, we just have maybe one or two other slides, and we'll save the rest for just answering questions here. But whether you were to do this through a Market Smart or some other vendor, you somehow sort of MacGyver your own CRM to do something like this. I just want to highlight how to track sort of what we're describing. One side of it, whether you did all these things or just all you did was score their age, for instance. But part of it is there's a matrix of data that comes out of a survey, and there's different weighting you could give to demographics or interests. But there's a way to score survey at the end of the day that would really help you find those folks who are ready for personal outreach from the get-go. When I was describing, hey, Joe Smith, answered the survey 12 months ago, and now he's leaning in, you truly can, track that type of engagement. Now, this is a screenshot from our dashboard at MarketSmart, but it's a real one from Brian's system where there's an individual who clicked through on an automated touch and spent time on a page on his site about donor advised funds, /DAF there. And so ultimately, the red here, although red can sometimes mean, a stop or bad or something like that. In our case, red means hot. But ultimately, when Brian, logs in, I think I took this screenshot, last week or something like that, Brian, there's truly a stream of people. Maybe they just answered the survey. Maybe they just clicked through on automation. Maybe they just spent time on the website, but a stream of people who are actively engaging with feedback loops and content related to major and legacy gifts. That's where he's focusing, and his team is focusing their time, to Brad's point. And that's not to say you have to throw all the wealth screen, everything out the window or something like that. But at the end of the day, the really only thing that matters is that they're actually wanting to engage with you on this topic. Everything else is just kind of static data that is not actually useful if they're not really willing to engage with you in a sense. Now, we'll jump ahead here, unless I'm jumping ahead too quick, Brad, to just some things we've been saying out loud, but just to kind of line it up. I know truly, as the director of sales at MarketSmart, that a lot of what we're describing here is, of course, promoting MarketSmart. And I really do hope at the end of the day that you do reach out, just even to kind of see what we're doing, see if it could work for you. But maybe you're not looking for a vendor. Maybe you don't have the budget for that. Maybe a number of reasons. Ultimately, what I would recommend is, at the very least, if anything, if you don't currently use a survey right now to engage your audience, you could use SurveyMonkey. You could use Google Survey. You could even put it on a Word doc and have your person at the front desk mail out 10 a day, by hand. But start doing it. Pick out people who are currently unassigned and stop waiting for there to be time to call them or for them to call you, and just invite them to give you their feedback. If you, on top of that, can create, even if it's just say 3-4 emails like you saw Brian doing, that can help with the follow-up, that's better than doing nothing and just sort of letting folks sit in your general marketing. So you can start small. It could be that you're just picking out 100 people that you're going to survey at first. So it doesn't have to be some big campaign, but it will actually work, truly, even if you did it kind of more bare bones like that. Maybe you already have automated sequences, or you already have a survey, but you're seeing kind of parts of what we do that you don't quite incorporate. Maybe your automation is very overly solicitous. Maybe your surveys don't actually, ask feasibility-esque questions like you saw with Brian of, which of our capital projects are most important to you. And then, ultimately, I'm sure you've had prospects that have gone through your process where you assigned them, you engaged them. They said, maybe I'll, consider that. They're in that kind of maybe stage. You can keep them warm and engaged, just like that story of Pam. It might sound overly simple, but it really can be that simple, of just making sure every few months, Pam is getting a thoughtful message from you that is non-solicitous and shares, the why, if you will, like Brian was highlighting. And then, maybe you don't have some, sort of advanced system like we are able to provide to score and track engagement, but it's still worth going to your marketing person. And, maybe one way to even think of it is saying that you've got, 100 prospects that are on the top of your list. Have any of them actually, opened an email or engaged with us recently? Start with those folks. You're clearly more top of mind. They're thinking about you. So yeah, those are some simple ways to implement in-house. And, at the same time, ultimately, if you're looking at today's presentation and want to learn how to do it, with an outside vendor like MarketSmart, of course, we're we're happy to show you all. There'll be a sort of QR code at the end here where you can request time. But yeah, I don't know, Brad or Brian, is there anything you would add to any of that?
I mean, real quick, I would just like focus in. It really, what really resonates with me as far as just some of these thoughts about implementing, taking something away. I would just say start small. I mean, I'm just a big believer in that. I've said just a few minutes ago, don't skip the why, and I think inviting feedback is a tremendous way to build great relationships long term. So don't skip that why. Find a way to do that that makes sense for you, and then stick to it. Stay the course. So don't skip the why and just stick to it and stay the course, and give that process the time that it deserves, and what our donors deserve, and you'll see, I think, the fruits of that in time.
Yeah, and if I could add to that, I mean, so much of our work is optimizing the time function of the fundraiser, of the individual fundraiser, of our faculty, of our staff, and having their time on task be individual one-on-one or customizing the engagement of our top potential donors. Um, we're very good at mechanics. We're very good at mechanics in fundraising, organizing our annual funds, organizing reunions, organizing galas and events. I think what we spend less time thinking about is how to optimize the customized engagement piece, the authentic deep dive work that we can do with our prospects. And I think, I love the idea of starting small, but once you get into the rhythm of that, really the results speak for themselves. So I'm really privileged to have had the chance to do this with you today, Jeff and Brian, and thanks everybody for coming along today.
Yeah, and thank you both for just being a part of it. And we'll hang on here, folks, for any questions you might have. I know I'm going to go backwards a little bit, see, because we didn't hit everybody's questions that were flying in here. I think, for instance, like Gerard, I saw your question earlier about, I think, basically segmentation. Like, is there a particular group that's best to target with this? I often give kind of a sort of macro and micro sort of answer of sorts. If you're just starting out, I think the best you're just about to launch your first survey, the best audience to go to, there's different ways to slice and dice it, but I think a high level is to say if you had one more frontline fundraiser, who would they be calling today? Because they're on the top of your list, but nobody's getting to them. Start there. So that could mean capacity screens, that could be affinity modeling, it could be even just subjective knowledge. I've always wanted to hear from our volunteers, but never had time, type of thing. But start there with, use the survey almost like it's a discovery officer is another way to say that. But on a macro scale, say over years, invite everybody, honestly. There's nothing to lose. Maybe there's more to gain, in targeting older or higher affinity or higher capacity folks. But at the same time, there's something to gain from anybody, even, a non-donor, and you can get very surprised by what that non-donor is, capable of and interested in doing. Saw another question coming here. Maybe I'll throw it to one of you guys. Let's see here, or maybe this was Brad. So you're actually typing an answer maybe to Barb there, or at least it said you were. But
yeah, just saying thanks, Bob.
Other
Thanks,
questions from the audience, Brad or Brian? Anything you wanted to add from a segmentation standpoint on that particular question?
I mean, the only thing I would add is if you think about a typical major donor, there's acquisition of wealth stage, there's accumulation of wealth stage, and then there's distribution. If there's a famous philanthropist who talks about learn, earn, return, right? And so learn obviously is the time you're spending developing your credibility as a professional. Earning is obvious, and then returning to society is like the final phase of life. To the extent that you're talking to people who are in the return phase, to me, that's an important group to segment. And with equity-based compensation and the way the world works these days, return happens earlier in people's lives than we might otherwise realize. So, you might want to start that return kind of plan giving asset-based surveying when donors are in their 50s. When they're even if they have college tuition on the horizon. Equity-based compensation changed the game. It's changing the game with IPOs and SpaceX and OpenAI and Anthropic. It changed it 15 years ago with Facebook and Google IPOs, and on and on and on. So I'd say start when people are in their mid 50s, early 50s. Try to understand what their situation is, the financial situation is, and keep them engaged through all their life events, so that when they think about their charitable choices, they don't just put their money in a DAF because they're overwhelmed by choice. They have a relationship with you. Make that to me is that's the magic. It's as much offense as it is defense.
Yeah, I mean, I think like we would have probably gone broader earlier. We were, in the very earliest days thinking, and I think the survey was a little bit more specifically in 2014 as it is today, geared for planned giving. So we were thinking of 55 plus kind of audience, which would be appropriate. But I mean, if I had to do it over again, I would be much broader from the start. And I mean, today, because of that, it's like it's a large number. I mean, it's a growing number of younger under 50 that we're engaging, but we're making up for lost time, if you will. And that's certainly one thing that I would encourage folks to be as broad and as possible. I see there's a comment about the before lifetime and the after. Yeah, on the case study, that was lifetime giving before we did any survey work, and then it was the giving, the cumulative giving after that. So all that was just outright giving, though. There's nothing about deferred gifts or estate gifts in that.
We still got a good 60 people here, but maybe
Yeah.
folks that are just want to hear the kind of the answers in a way. I mean, there are even some data points we didn't fully flesh out. I mean, it's kind of, I don't know, counter to what I was saying of don't only use a survey for plan giving, but the other side of that coin is it's really good for plan giving too. That's almost kind of the challenge in a way is not
Yeah,
just drawing those, answers out, but this is over the course of, a decade, but just from the type of engagement we described today, there's, other folks who've disclosed legacy gifts other ways.
yeah, these were folks that we didn't know, and of course, as folks on the call here, that these are largely revocable gifts. So it's critical for us to acknowledge, know them, see them, appreciate them, and not just kind of put them in a society and check a box so we can have another vanity metric to celebrate. And that has been unbelievable for us. We don't really what we found is we have a legacy society. The lion and some are joining it as a result. But we are, and somebody in the call can email me afterwards, and I'll be very open to different perspectives. Maybe Brad has one too. We're not chasing after folks, twisting arms to why our society is so important. We actually have a new category that we've created. We're tracking those folks that they are disclosed gifts, but they're not part of our legacy society. But we appreciate them in exactly the same ways. We just don't confuse them in the society mailings and messaging, if that makes sense. But the point is not whether they're in our society or not, is that they have done something generous to include the college in their plans. And so yeah, that's been a real game changer for us, is the number of folks that just invites relationship and just, kind of identifying. But yeah, the legacy piece certainly big, but we didn't mention some of the other things. We do some segmentation. Somebody asked what kind of segmentation. We talked about more age, but we do a number of other offerings around that we kind of tie in here. A lot of our work around QCD or DAF is here. And so for those, we are kind of tailoring that on some list pools. And, we have the ability at any time. We're not blasting out 30,000 at one time as a rhythm throughout the year. Again, we're about quality, not quantity. So we are carefully curating lists throughout the year. And maybe it matters for the rhythm of the college, right? So maybe we're in a capital campaign and we're raising a lot of resources for athletics. So then we might pool an athletics oriented list. They're not, and they're going to get the same survey invitation, but that might be a priority for us to hear from them first. So we have that ability to kind of prioritize some of those lists. Again, we aim for everyone to have that opportunity and be as broad and inclusive as possible throughout the year, but we can kind of order those in ways that make sense for the rhythms of the institution. I think that was one of the questions I saw there.
And Brian, the point that you're making about continuing to ask these questions, I'll talk very personally. My relationship with my own alma mater is dynamic. It changes regularly. The higher education environment in the 1990s is very different than it is right now. And what the college looks like and values now may be different. And there may be positive and negative evolution. That's okay. But they're at least willing to have a conversation with me and ask me what I think. And so the idea of consistent surveying acknowledges the dynamism in the relationship. So to me, if you're not having that conversation, and Jeff, I love how you laid out, you can start small and do this simply. if you're not inviting that discussion, you're probably missing a relationship that's evolving in real time. And, if it's not evolving towards you just by their own natural evolution, it's likely evolving away from you. And I think
Yeah.
that's the risk. So put yourself out there and invite that conversation, invite that feedback. Because again, in that sense, the alternative is a disconnection. And that's the worst thing for us, right?
That's not what we want. That's not ultimately what they want. They they want us to prioritize them. And yeah, that's a number we didn't get into. There's a lot of numbers, but take this away. What I love the most is, to that point, Brad, we've had hundreds of the thousands. We've had hundreds who over these years have advanced themselves. They've moved. So we continue to ask them multiple times over the years, really the same questions and the same opportunities to share their feedback and to be heard and seen. And hundreds of those folks have moved themselves along, like Pam that I showed you earlier. Hundreds.
Mhm. Amazing.
Yeah. And that's sometimes there's, I think, two sides of it. One is, that there's sort of an admission within that, hey, there are actually people who want to consider and make these gifts, and they may never want to talk to me, or at least for most of the journey, they may not want to talk to me. In some ways, you see a lot of sort of, whether it's books or consultation, etc., that almost tries to fight that reality rather than embrace it. And this is really about embracing it, and rather than saying, why would they do that? They need to talk to me. I know how to help them. Why not give them a way to move themselves? It's just an entirely different paradigm, than the traditional, in a sense, of moves management, where you're moving them.
Karen asked how many emails we sent out. We get a 50% open. So I'd have to, somebody quick on numbers can back us into that. But we get a 50%. We also get over a 5% click rate, which I'm not a marketing expert. That's why we work with, I'm an expert at concierge service with major gift donors. But my understanding is that's a really strong number, over 5% on the click rate. So we're not, yeah, and you hear that we have 30,000 alumni, a few close to 50,000 in total records. But so we're not talking about hundreds of thousands of records here, or nor millions of emails sent or something like that. I mean, 50% on the open, and like I said, over 5% on the click on that is even stronger. We tend to have a pretty engaged group anyway, but this is as strong or stronger than anything else that we do.
Yeah, I'd say that's higher than average for other clients, but ultimately I would also say it's kind of varies vertical by vertical, and even really segment by segment. Not always, but we tend to see you're going to get a higher response rate. This might not be a surprise, but just the data we've seen. But you're going to get a higher response rate the higher someone's affinity is with the organization, especially based on their longevity of giving more than anything. You'll get a lower response rate with a non-donor, but we actually don't see necessarily a lower percentage of that non-donor segment that ends up showing interest in legacy and major gifts. So you'll end up getting more prospects out of the higher affinity pool because more of them respond, but it's not actually that they're actually so much more qualified necessarily, at least in our data, to make those types of gifts. It's more about just truly at the end of the day, their readiness, passion, and assets, and how all of that kind of comes together. Um, the
Jeff,
other,
one other thing I was going to make a comment on, because if there's someone that's still hanging on, they might be wondering. For us, we've had since '98, I think was the year that we founded our Legacy Society, and we have again our faster growing sector, those not joining that but still disclosing gifts. But so what we do actually is, again, we automate we take the same concept to those that are in our and that's actually something I think I want to point out too. So we're not just continually sourcing new people and piling up and hoarding donors and legacy donors, but we are continuing to have a posture of listening and inviting feedback from those that have already joined that Legacy Society. So we actually do that on an annual basis, and what we're doing is we're inviting like conversation with our team, so that we can, so that we can hear your story again, so that you can maybe have that opportunity again. Don't skip the why. Don't underestimate how valuable it is in every conversation to be reminding donors, to inviting their story. But that's been fruitful. Again, for those in the call, they're like, yeah, that all sounds great, but what are the results there? That has opened up additional, as we know, if somebody has a plan gift, if they have for example, charitable gift annuity, which we offer, the likelihood of them doing additional charitable work with you is significant. They've already told you then that they have appreciated assets or they have additional cash, however they establish that CGA. So as an example, we've seen that be very fruitful for additional expanded plan gifts, additional plan gifts, and quite frankly, just the feedback of just, hey, I appreciate that you're not forgetting us. Because again, I would encourage everybody on this call still hanging on. Don't forget those folks that are already in that legacy side. A lot, again, Brad, you know better than I. So much research, so much conversation on that. But guys, we need to wake up and realize that that can be and will be changed to another charity if we're not staying in relationship and having that posture.
Yeah, and obviously we're in a privileged position, as fundraisers and in the lives of our donors, especially if they've engaged with us at a deep, personal level, and the idea that we might, for air quotes, forget about them or not engage them, is something to avoid, and we all know that. I agree with you completely. Like reaching out to them, even without an agenda, is to me some of the best conversations I've had with donors in that stewardship phase, or even if it's, even if they're contemplating an increased gift, just checking in. How are you doing? Did you see we're doing this? Just want to let you know how much we appreciate you and your support. Goes miles in the engagement process, and it's fun. You get to make some friends in the boot. What's better than that?
And we always tie like a Calendly or some, others have that maybe on their signature. That's helpful, but I'm also reminded because that's convenient for us. It may not be convenient. I mean, based on someone's age or just their preference, they may not want to do that. So, again, we try to reduce that friction for the back and forth of scheduling time. And I think we should continue to push for those ways, but we should also still accommodate. That's why when we even do the surveys themselves, recognizing we may not have an email address for 100% of our records. So that's another thing for some folks. So we've had really great success. Maybe Market Smart's been surprised at how much success we've had. But it's been, and I had to make the case to say, let's give it a shot. It wasn't the first thing we did, of course. We went electronic first, but to my VP to say, hey, let's give that a shot, and that was fruitful because now we have email address. Actually, ironically, right? Someone's got it in the mail that we paid to print and mail to them with postage, which isn't inexpensive, but now we've captured an email address so we can keep, they maybe signed up and given us permission to communicate with them in certain ways. And like, that's a win right there. You know what I mean? So yeah.
Absolutely.
Well,
Absolutely.
this has been a lot of fun, and
Yeah, we
I'd
covered a
like to
lot of
mention we're
ground.
going to be sending this out to everybody. I don't know if you want to wrap it up, Jeff, and let everybody know what they can expect afterward.
Yeah, we'll be sending out, as I mentioned in the beginning, the slides and the recording. And I just want to thank both of you guys again, Brian, sharing your story, Brad, sharing stories from the field as well. I know I did speak a bunch to, Market Smart and how we're available. Brad also, let's give you a little plug too that, Rootstock is there also, and Brad to help support, coaching, feasibilities, assessment. I'm probably butchering the pitch for you or something, but I also want to definitely shout that out that Brad's a fantastic consultant if you're looking for support in that regard as well. But yeah,
Thanks,
thank
Jeff.
you both. Thank you everyone for staying on, especially everybody who stayed on long. Looks like we've got a good 36 folks. I think we had something good to say then, right? That are still on here. There was close to 100 plus during the actual presentation. So yeah, anything Brad and Brian you wanted to say at the end here?
Super appreciative. Thank you, Brad. Thank you, Jeff. Thank you all for joining, and just keep up the great work on behalf of your organizations.
Yeah, we are, major gift people. Our major gift officers are quite literally the circulatory system of organizations. So sometimes it feels like it's a high burnout space, but we really do occupy a privileged position. So don't ever forget that. And I love the idea of keep finding your why, Brian. I'll take that with me. I'm gonna footnote that, but I will take it with me.
There we go. There we go. And I saw again one we will send out the recording. There's a little comment there to everybody. So everybody have a good rest of your Friday. Have a great long weekend if you're yet taking the Monday off and everything. And good luck and thank you again.